Welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin.
Hello and welcome to Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin. Dan is a board-certified attorney in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with over 25 years of experience. He boasts many accolades in the field of Michigan criminal defense and has earned the highest peer ranking available for legal ethics and ability. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today's episode is Should I Take That Breath Test? Defending Drunk Driving Cases. Dan, good to see you again.
You as well, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
All right, before I get into some cases and things, can you answer that question? Because everybody is always asking, like, do I take the breathalyzer? Because some people say you should, some people say you shouldn't. What is your opinion on that?
You know, it's funny. Not only do you get asked that, I get asked that everywhere I go, and I get calls at 2 o'clock in the morning from friends and clients and so forth. Typically, the answer is yes, take it. Now, I don't ever give clients advice, yes or no, because there are consequences to both choices, I should say. But generally speaking, in Michigan, if you refuse the choice of test, you're going to lose your driving privileges for a year. Now, people don't understand that, even though they are read what are called chemical test rights by a police officer. So refusing generally means you're going to lose your license for a year, and they're still going to get a vial of your blood to test because they're going to go get a warrant. So some states, maybe there's some strategy in refusing and hope that either they can't get a warrant, won't go get a warrant, and then they don't have a result. But boy, almost uniformly, refusing the test is more negative than positive.
Interesting. Okay. So a case all over the national news this year was the arrest of Justin Timberlake for drunk driving in New York. Seems like every day someone in the news is getting arrested for a DUI, whether it's celebrities of actors, musicians, athletes. I noticed you wrote a book, Michigan Drunk Driving and Driver's License Handbook. How big a part of your practice is defending DUI cases?
Yeah, there's no question. It's year in and year out. If I were to do a count, it's years where it's 40%. There's years it's probably been 60 to 65%.
Wow.
And somewhere in between. And it's always a big part of my practice. I've always defended people charged with what we call drinking and driving or drug and driving related offenses. And you mentioned Justin Timberlake. I mean, you're right. Every day we seem to have somebody in the public eye who thinks it's okay to drink and drive, or they are borderline in drink and drive, and then there's some good litigation there. But despite all of the public sentiments over the years, all of the consequences that people see, all the billboards, all the intervention by Mothers Against Drunk Driving, you still have people who make the very foolish decision to drink and drive. What I say to clients is, look, it is the type of offense where it brings in otherwise good people and professionals and otherwise smart people who make a terrible, tragic decision. And that decision can be sort of a small smack on the wrist, or it can be a lifetime changer depending on the consequences and background. So I gave you a long-winded answer to say year in and year out, it's a significant part of our firm's practice.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to go away.
You're right. 100% right.
How has it changed over the years since you've started practicing 27 years ago?
I think the most notable changes, one was the blood alcohol level. In Michigan, when I started practicing, it was a 0.10 was the cutoff. And we brought it down here in Michigan to match the federal standard and what most states say, which is 0.08. And so fewer drinks to get people over that unfortunate legal limit. That's a big change. You also have significantly new offenses, a lot of controlled substance, marijuana driving, prescription drug driving offenses. So that's sort of been rather a newer area of the law, at least over the last 10 to 15 years or so. Some of the penalties have increased as the public gets more and more upset with these laws, with these offenses, I should say, and people are given a smack on the wrist, like I mentioned before. So a lot of changes with respect to penalties, consequences with driver's license. And lastly, you have technology again. Almost every police department now has either body cam or car video or both. And so every encounter, for the most part, is encountered on video. So that's made our jobs both more easy and more difficult at the same time. But it certainly shows a picture of whether someone was intoxicated or impaired and is a big piece of OWI litigation.
There was a time where the kind of general consensus was, if not general consensus, but a lot, especially in small towns where, someone would get pulled over and be like, hey, just get home safely. The cop was just like letting them go. Or I grew up in Chicago, and the joke was, it was like the police officers didn't want to deal with that. So they wouldn't even really, they didn't even really pull people over. Was it the same way when you started? And have you seen a shift towards more being a little more diligent by the police, a little more diligency from the police?
There's no doubt about that. Not only saw it at the beginning of my career, I mean, like you, when I was young, we'd get pulled over and half the time we'd know the police officers. They'd have us dump out the beer from our car and just, either call our parents or let us go. And that even happened, up until probably 10, 15 years ago. But with the body cams and the policies that police agencies have and police officers losing their jobs because they let someone go, I don't know a police officer now who would ever risk that. They're not going to risk their job and their pension over someone who's not a family member and they barely know. So gone are the days of we'll drive you home or you're only a block away. Virtually every encounter in which the person is impaired, intoxicated, or even close, they're going away in handcuffs.
Yeah. What kind of DUI cases do you handle?
So we generally handle all DUI cases. And that's a big umbrella too, right?
Yeah.
Because in Michigan, we don't use DUI, even though that's sort of the slang. We use OWI, operating while intoxicated. And that charge has in it both alcohol, controlled substance, prescription drugs. There's no separate charges for all of those. So we handle first-time OWI offenses. We handle repeat OWI offenses. We handle OWI offenses that result in death or injury and had quite a few of those over the years. And so you generally see categories of, was there a repeat offense? Was there a resulting injury or death? And if not, was it a first offense? Was it alcohol, controlled substance? And then what was the level? And so long answer short, anything in that sort of big tent, our firm handles.
Okay. What are some of the most memorable cases that you've handled?
Yeah, I think probably the ones that I can teach lessons to my kids or my friends from high school or anyone I'm out with. I always think of the local real estate agent here who's well-respected and a great person, had two young kids at home, left a golf outing, and looked down at his phone and head first into another car and killed a poor young woman. And he went to state prison. I mean, no prior criminal history. He was just over the legal limit, and he spent maybe 5 years in state prison. And he sort of, I won't, of course, say his name, but he's sort of a lesson I always say, look, you may think you're fine. You may think it's daytime and you're going to get home. You get in an accident and someone's injured or killed. It doesn't matter who your lawyer is. It doesn't matter what your history is. You are going to state prison. So that's sort of one of those memorable cases in a string like that. Last year, I represented a high school student who had just graduated. She hit a pedestrian and killed him. Luckily for her, there was sort of a hiccup in the law that we looked at where she couldn't be charged with OWI causing death because she was under the legal limit, even though she was under 21. But that's a memorable case too. Again, for any of us that have kids, my kids are in their early 20s, I always tell them about those cases because that could be them if they make the very foolish decision to get behind the wheel, even after one or two drinks.
Yeah, and like to your point about the real estate agent, which is such a sad story, but you put the cell phones on top of that. You're maybe a little slower to get your eyes back up to the road. You maybe hang a little bit longer on that phone. I mean, we shouldn't be looking at our phones anyway while we're driving, but if you've been drinking, your reaction is just slower in general. So you put those two things together, and that's a bad combo.
You're 100% right. And the reason that police officers give those field sobriety tests that you see with people touching their nose and walk and turn is to test their ability to follow guidance, to be able to act under pressure, to test their reaction times. And if those are affected, like you said, imagine how slow your reaction time is if you take your eyes off the wheel while drinking or using a narcotic in driving.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You brought up those field sobriety tests. We didn't talk about that before when we talked about the breathalyzer. Where do you land on field sobriety tests? Because I've talked to people before, lawyers who are like, it's so difficult to try to pass those if you're stone cold sober because you've got traffic going by you, you're nervous, you're embarrassed maybe. Like, where do you land on those?
Yeah, you know what? I would say this without any hesitation. I would not take them. I don't drink and drive, but if I did and I was pulled over, I would politely decline them for the reasons you stated and because they are not designed for anyone to pass or fail. They are really just giving the officer cues or clues to build a case against you. And there's no downside to refusing a field sobriety test if you politely say no, thank you. So it simply, in most instances, gives the police more ammunition to build a case against you. Now, of course, there are exceptions to that rule. If someone is just at the legal limit and they want to prove that they are fine to drive and they do very well on these tests, that can be a difference maker to a police officer or prosecutor too. So once again, not a bright line rule, but for the most part, I see no real upside into taking those performance tests.
What about if you had anything to drink and you're being accused of having something to drink? Would you take it then?
Again, probably in that instance, I would say no and say, please give me a breath test or a urine test. Let's sort of cut to the chase, or blood test, cut to the chase, because they're probably going to see, as you said, cues or clues if you are stone cold sober, because those tests are not easy. Oftentimes people struggle with the physical limitations of being able to do those tests. So yeah, if I got pulled over and the officer had some strange suspicion I was not drinking and driving, I would probably just say, I'll take whatever chemical test you want. Let's do that right now.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. My balance gets worse and worse every year, just getting older. So
no doubt about that.
What are the consequences of a conviction in Michigan?
Well, for most people that are convicted, let's call it a first offense OWI, they're going to suffer some consequences in the courtroom, right? They're going to have probation. You're going to get hit in the wallet financially. You're going to get some points and your insurance rates are going to go up. You're probably going to be placed on probation and so forth. Most people aren't going to jail beyond the night they spent in the drunk take following the arrest. So those are sort of the direct consequences of a first offense. Then you start going up that ladder, Kevin, to when people have priors or someone is hurt or injured. You talk about more and more severe consequences, up to and including prison, like the real estate agent I mentioned. So those are direct consequences. Once again, every criminal offense has those forgotten collateral consequences. And for drinking and driving, it's the driver's license primarily. You will face some sort of suspension or restriction to your license if you are convicted of a DUI or OWI, or if you refuse. It can be a long-time revocation where you're simply never driving again, depending on your history. And then there are these things like immigration consequences, the ability to possess weapons or to get a carry permit. And strangely enough, you can't travel to Canada when you have a DUI or OWI conviction out of the United States of America, something very few people ever think about and should think about if they ever travel up north. So you've got, once again, the category of direct and those forgotten collateral consequences for an OWI conviction in Michigan.
So if someone loses their license because of an OWI in Michigan, how can you help them in that situation?
Yeah, we're one of very few attorneys out there, firms out there, that does what is called driver's license restoration. And I've done it for now 25 years. It started with helping a friend from high school, and I just sort of got interested and became more of a specialist in that area. And what happens is, if someone is suspended for a refusal or is revoked because they have 2 or more convictions, the Secretary of State in Michigan makes the person prove that they are a safe risk. And by all accounts, it is the toughest state in the country to return a license following a revocation for drinking and driving. I'm licensed and practiced in California, and it was much easier there. You're talking about taking some courses and filling out some forms. Michigan, you tend to see people denied over and over for years. So we help people in that situation. We help them prove that they are indeed a safe risk. We help them fill out all the forms. And then most notably, we attend the hearings with them, and we're sort of their advocate for why they deserve back the privilege to drive.
You know, conventional wisdom would say with the rise of things like Uber and Lyft and so many options, especially you live in a college town, there's always some sort of way to get around. Why do you think people are still drink and drive? Especially because I feel like a lot of times people say, you know, they're like 5 minutes from their house and they still do it. Any insight on that?
It drives me crazy, and it shouldn't, because it's what I do for a living. But honestly, I don't understand when people continue to do it. I don't understand when people do it and they have prior convictions, or the risk of hurting someone. It is so easy to get an Uber. It is cheaper than the thousands and thousands of dollars that they're going to pay for an OWI. I don't know whether it's an inhibition thing, a selfish thing, a money thing, a convenience thing, or all those wrapped into one. But I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where people are just exclusively taking Ubers and taking cabs and walking. I think you're going to have drinking and driving offenses for years and years and years, and we're never going to, unfortunately, come to a solution.
Unless we have all self-driving cars.
That's one solution, or altogether we go back to prohibition with no alcohol. But even then, I'm guessing people would find a way to drink and drive.
I have a feeling. Yes, I have a feeling. Describe your approach to actually trying a case in front of a jury. I mean, does that happen often?
Not as often as it used to. And I say that because in my experience, juries and judges, I should say, are very number driven. So if someone is a 0.12, juries, by just propaganda or education or hearing that, will know, well, there are several notches over the legal limit. It becomes very difficult to win those cases at trial. So trial does not really become feasible or logical for many clients. Now, there are certain exceptions. A lot of times people will say, I was not driving. Someone else was driving. And so there are a lot of trials on who was the driver. I've got one of those coming up. There's a lot of cases where people are really borderline. They might come back at 0.9, but their field sobriety tests are very accurate and done very well. And those people may have no choice but to go to trial. And then once you get to trial, it's a matter of really, once again, finding your theory, selling that theory to the jury, having a good network of experts, and then perhaps most effectively cross-examining the police officers, because they're going to have an inherent bias to say your client was impaired or intoxicated. And it's your job, if you're defending these charges, to make sure that the jury or judge sees there's another side of the story. Maybe a reason someone didn't do well on that walk and turn test is knee surgery and not the 3 or 4 drinks that they drank hours before.
Yeah, it's the I know you have to have a number, the 0.08. Another issue is if you have a 300-pound guy versus a 90-pound woman, that level, the certain drinks affect people like that differently. Is that where the field sobriety test can come in? I mean, or I guess if you blow over the limit, it doesn't matter how big you are, right?
It's a great point and a great question, and you're 100% right. Michigan has what is basically called U-ball, unlawful bodily alcohol content or level. And so if you're over a 0.8, it really doesn't matter how you do. For the most part, you have an unlawful blood alcohol level. And that is a source of frustration for people who are, have a higher tolerance, or bigger people, male versus female, and they are not, in their minds, affected. So to answer your question, that is where the field sobriety tests come in. But don't forget about the driving. In my experience, if someone is pulled over for a headlight, issue or a license plate issue, and they're borderline, they have a much better chance of success than if they're pulled over for weaving or blowing through a stop sign or indicia of bad driving. So driving and field sobriety tests are the big sort of clues to look at when someone is right at that legal limit, especially if they're a bigger person or they're a male or they have higher tolerance. Then it's something that you want to look at to see if you can successfully defend the case at trial.
When should someone contact you if they were pulled over for a drunk driving offense?
The grand majority of people do contact us within a day or so of that arrest. Some people call us from the police station, as I mentioned before, or family members do. But waiting until you get the court notice, which can be months, and in some instances, months and months and months, to me, you've lost ground on things that can be done both preemptively, proactively, to establish your sobriety, to establish maybe some things that you can get done before you get to the court system. But also there may be consequences brewing that you're not aware of. Like you had mentioned before, refusing a breath test. Sometimes people don't call us until it's too late and they've already been suspended for a year and they can't feed their family. They can't go to work. And they say, what do I do? I said, you should have called us 14 days ago. Mm-hmm. So there are things that attorneys like I can do in the early stages. And in my view, that is the time in which you're going to have an attorney and then have that attorney in place when the case opens up weeks or months down the road.
Yeah, that's good advice for sure. Well, thank you for joining us on Michigan Justice Chronicles with Dan Geherin. To connect with Dan, head to glgmichigan.com. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe our channel. We love having you be part of our community, and leave us a review as well. Dan, thanks for all the insights. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.